Good evening, family. Good evening. Let the audience in the back have a seat, please. We have a special beginning, so if you don't mind, we're going to go a little bit off script. This is really important. From the 30th District, right here in Harlem, New York State Senator Cordell Clear.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much. It's an honor and always a pleasure to be home at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. And it is so timely to have this event around Juneteenth that we are celebrating. I remember when most people didn't even know what that was. Yeah, but so it's just a good feeling to have it happen right now. So I'm just here to say hello to everybody and just really thank Sylvia White. Yeah, come on. The Bridge Foundation, and also Save Harlem Now! Exclamation point. Two groups that have been at the forefront of protecting our history, knowing how important it is to protect our legacy and preserve. Preservation is so important, and I also want to shout out Sharon Wilkins, who's here. You know, I remember when I first heard about the African burial ground, the Harlem African burial ground, and it was as a staffer for the late, great Bill Perkins. And he immediately assigned us to find out everything we could, and we were able to do that through my colleague and co-worker, Michael Henry Adams, at the time. And I remember us shouting, there are bodies under there, and there's history, and there were people telling us there were not. They didn't find anything. But we persisted, and ultimately, the right look was taken, and we did find that there were bodies of our ancestors buried at the Harlem African Burial Ground. And it was such a, this burial ground has so many layers to it. I remember working with environmentalists because, you know, they were buried underneath a bus depot, right? And we had WEACT and Peggy Shepard and those who wanted to decommission all these bus depots that were in Harlem. 8 of the 9 in Manhattan, in Harlem. Toxic, affecting our health, asthma rates. And so this has been a long and layered struggle, but here we are today. And we have EDC and those working on redeveloping this site. So what I would say here this evening, I see the people in the room. This is quality. Some more are coming and some more should be here. This is our burial ground. It is imperative that we narrate this story, that we give a proper tribute, respect to those bodies that are beneath that depot. They are counting on us to make sure that it's done right. Not just them, our ancestors in the past, but the future generations deserve to know we were here and how we were here, and for us, that we did the right thing by those people that are buried there. So I'm happy to be a part. I am supportive in every way that my office can be. You know, they drew some lines and like, my district is right across the street, but not really. Because I will show up at every meeting and I will certainly be involved in every effort to make sure that we do what is right and that these human beings are respected properly and in a dignified way. So I thank you for your work. Save Harlem Now, Claudette, I know you're here. I thank you, Sylvia. I thank everybody in this room because we're all stewards. We all are gonna play a part in this. We're all gonna play a role in this, and I'm counting on it, and I look forward to it. And I just wanna thank you for hosting this, continuing to educate our community. There's so much that we don't know. And it's so important that we do know where we were so that we could always know where we're going. Thank you so much.
What is the Schomburg Center? To me, it is home. The place where we come to see who we really are, not just somebody else's reflection of who we are.
The Schomburg Center is a place of culture, it's a place of history, it's a place of knowledge.
The Schomburg Center, to me, is a repository of all of the things that has documented our sense of worth as a people.
For me, that means that it is a place of immense power.
The Schomburg Center is a public research library and a cultural institution.
For the study of the Pan-African world.
It is perhaps the best in the world.
My Schomburg Center is Arturo Alfonso Schomburg.
Arturo Schomburg said, Black history and culture and intellect exists at a time when most people didn't believe that. He collected those evidences, and that became the beginning of the collection.
And it has expanded and has grown to where it is now a world-class institution.
It holds over 10 million items.
There's no parallel anywhere that brings to light what we as people of color have done, what we continue to do.
Black culture is all of culture. The universals that animate everyone's life happen here for all people.
The Schomburg for me is one of the center pillars of Harlem. When I started the journey of finding out about Red Rooster and Harlem, the very first place I went to was the Schomburg.
Researchers from around the world come and use what we have here.
I could not have written just about any of the books that I've written without the Schomburg Center's archives, resources.
The Schomburg Center is much more than a library. We encourage lifelong learning and exploration.
The Junior Scholars Program is a Saturday program with students from 5th grade to senior year in high school to help them learn about Black history and culture.
Learning about my history is important because it teaches me who I am.
The Schomburg Junior Scholars Program is going to do nothing but uplift them.
So many talented and brilliant people have walked the corridors of this amazing institution over the years. From Octavia Butler to Toni Morrison and James Baldwin, Ella Fitzgerald, Alvin Ailey, and Harry Belafonte, who graced the stage in this room of the American Negro Theater.
This place evokes great memories. It was a gift to us in our community to really try to find that space to reflect expressions of Black experience. I just knew that the environment and what I saw these young African Americans doing was a place I needed to be.
What is my Schomburg Center? I'm standing here at the Cosmogram, which underneath holds the ashes of the poet Langston Hughes. On the evening when this Cosmogram was dedicated, people began to empty out of the auditorium. A jazz trio struck up, and to my amazement, Amira Baraka went over and asked Maya Angelou for a dance. And they started to dance on top of the Cosmogram, on top of the ashes of Langston Hughes, and I felt what a fitting way to kiss the memory of Langston.
The Schomburg Center is a research institute and a library, but it's so much more than that.
There's something going on every day.
So many amazing people come here to talk about their creative craft, to share what inspires them. The Schomburg Center's collections help to tell stories even beyond our walls.
The Schomburg Center is here in this exhibition at MoMA, One-Way Ticket, Jacob Lawrence's Migration Series. We depend on the resources of the Schomburg to enable us to tell this story. Thinking about the implications of the past on the present is absolutely crucial for understanding the next steps, understanding what we have to do to go forward.
We today have the responsibility of making sure that new artists and activists, new scholars and poets know that this place continues to be a resource and a source of inspiration for the work that we must continue to do.
The Schomburg Center is knowledge.
The Schomburg Center, to me, is education.
The Schomburg Center is home, it is family, it is foundational.
The Schomburg Center is inspiration.
The Schomburg is with me in everything that I do.
Community, inside and out.
The Schomburg Center is us.
The Schomburg Center is you, and we invite each and every one of you to find your Schomburg Center.
Thank you. Welcome to the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. I'm Casey Matthews, Deputy Director. On behalf of our staff and volunteers, it's our pleasure to welcome you all this evening for this very unique Juneteenth convening, a conversation among New York City area burial ground historic sites. I want to thank all the partner organizations for joining this discussion and for their tireless efforts to make this evening possible, and certainly thank you to Cordell Clear for taking time out of her busy schedule for joining us tonight. As you know, the Schomburg Center is celebrating our centennial, 100 years of collecting, preserving, and sharing the richness of Black history and culture. Admittedly, we've been a little swamped with work recently. The start of the centennial was May 8th, but when Dr. Sharon Wilkins, one of the founders of the Harlem African Burial Ground Initiative, asked for Schomburg's participation in this program, we could not say no. This is an issue very close to our own hearts and our work. One of our research areas, the Lapita Center for the Historical Analysis of Transatlantic Slavery, named for donors Sidney and Ruth Lapidus, is dedicated to expanding scholarship and raising awareness and historical literacy on the Atlantic slave trade and African descendants. And we've recently launched 2 lessons about slavery and abolition in our Teaching with the Schomburg Center Archives series. Abolition as a Black-led movement, and race, racism, and white supremacy. These are classroom resources designed for middle school and high school teachers, and they're available online. They're on our website, and they are free to anyone who wants to download them. While we design them for teachers, I will tell you there are parents who use them to homeschool, and lots of after-school programs that use them as well. Free, schomburgcenter.org. Schomburg Center celebrated our Juneteenth this past Saturday with our Centennial Festival, focusing on the joys of literacy and literature. We're happy you're celebrating this Juneteenth with us as well this evening by remembering and honoring our ancestors and learning more about the historic location and development near us in East Harlem and about similar sites in the New York City area. To be respectful of our guests in person and online, you would please take your time at the moment and silence your cell phones. Yes, reach into the bag in the pocket, silence the cell phones. And please, no flash photography during the program. This is being live streamed, so it is being recorded as well. Please join me in welcoming the moderator for this evening, Senior Project Manager for Neighborhood Strategies in the New York City Economic Development Corporation, Saradine Pierre.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming with us to attend this really important conversation. As Kevin mentioned, my name is Saradine Pierre, and I'm with the New York City Economic Development Corporation. We've been working with the Harlem African Burial Ground Initiative since 2015 to make sure that the sacred site is really recognized and honors those who were buried there before. It's been an honor for myself to work on this project and to hear about the history and the long-term advocacy that has happened for us to get to this point now. So just to start, I want to really thank our team who showed up, our project partners, as well as all of you for showing up and are willing to learn more and make sure that other folks know about this important history. There's so many African burial grounds across the city that we just don't know about. It's been lost to time, they've been covered up, and so we want to have events like this so more folks know about it and more folks feel empowered to advocate for these sites. And so I hope you take away from this conversation ways to get involved with each of these organizations that I'll introduce shortly, and also feel compelled to share more about this history with your neighbors, friends, colleagues, anyone who you come across. So thank you again for attending. And, thank you. And I'd like to invite our project partners. We have our folks from the NAACP Mid-Manhattan branch, Kendall Reed. I'll invite her to come up to speak.
Good evening, everyone. And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and distinguished guests, community leaders, and enthusiastic advocates among us here today. I would like to extend a warm welcome to our esteemed panelists, participants, and community leaders and members who have come to share their knowledge, their perspectives, and their experiences. My name is Kendall Reed. I am the president of the NAACP branch, and on behalf of the officers and executive committee, it is an honor to stand here before you today to pay tribute to the historic African American burial grounds in Harlem and the 5 boroughs. It's a significant piece of our collective history that reflects the struggles, triumphs, and enduring legacy of our community. I stand before you today alongside esteemed partners such as the National Action Network, the National Urban League, united in our pursuit of justice and equality as we honor the African American burial grounds, a sacred site that embodies the struggles and triumphs of the community. Since its founding in 1909, the NAACP has been dedicated for the past 116 years to preserving our legacy and our history, ensuring that the struggles of the past inform the progress of the future, and work tirelessly to prevent the injustices of history repeating themselves so that we can build a more just and equitable society for all. The NAACP's involvement highlights the importance of preserving the legacy and contributions of African Americans. It is crucial that we continue to document and share the stories of those who came before us to ensure the impact of the world is not forgotten. Building on the NAACP's 116th year legacy of advocacy and activism, we remain committed to advancing justice and equality. We honor leaders like our New York State past president, Dr. Hazelden Dukes, president of the NAACP, the Honorable Congressman Charlie B. Rangel, our former Secretary of State, Basil A. Patterson, the Honorable Percy E. Sutton, and our first Black mayor, David Dinkins, by ensuring that their work is not in vain. I'm proud to represent the NAACP Mid-Manhattan branch in this effort, working together to build a brighter and better future for all. The African American burial grounds in New York City and in Harlem serve as a continued reminder of the struggles and the triumphs of our ancestors. And the NAACP's mission to promote equality and justice is deeply connected to the stories and sacrifices of those buried in these grounds. By honoring their memory, we continue to fight for a more just society, building the legacy for those who came before us. The African American grounds of Harlem's complex history is deeply entwined with the NAACP's mission, underscoring the importance of preserving the legacy and the contributions of African Americans. Again, by documenting and sharing stories of these who came before us, we ensure their impact on the world is not forgotten, and their sacrifice and achievements continue to inspire future generations. I would like to thank the African American Burial Grounds Initiative and the NYCEDC for this special occasion for remembrance and collaboration here at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. I would like to thank William Allen and all those who were participating in the organizing and planning this event and allowing the NAACP to be a part of it. Thank you, and I hope everyone has a great evening and enjoys the discussion that we're about to have here tonight.
Thank you so much. Thank you. All right, thank you, Kendall Reed. Next, I'd like to invite up to the stage our partners with the National Urban League. We have Jessica Richardson and Jennifer Scott.
Thank you all. Good evening. How is everyone? Welcome. On behalf of the National Urban League and our esteemed President and CEO, Mark H. Morial, I want to thank the Harlem African Burial Ground Initiative, the organizers, and all the panel participants, community leaders, and also, of course, you, the audience, for this important partnership and special program this evening. My name is Jennifer Scott, and I am the Executive Director and Chief Curator of the Urban Civil Rights Museum in Harlem, a brand new history museum that will be soon opening here in Harlem, down the street. Yay. We're very excited. The National Urban League is dedicated to economic empowerment, equality, and social justice to help elevate the standard of living in historically underserved urban communities. Headquartered in New York City, the League was founded in 1910 in response to the Great Migrations that brought millions of African Americans from the rural South to the industrial North. One of the country's longest-running civil rights organizations, the Urban League will be returning home to Harlem, where it began 115 years ago, to establish our headquarters in the new Urban League Empowerment Center on West 125th Street. In addition to NUL's new headquarters, the new multi-purpose building will include a conference center, major retail outlets, which many of you may have already seen, are active and operating, nonprofit offices with many of our partners and potential partners, including Studio Museum of Harlem's administrative offices, 171 units of affordable housing, and last but not least, the Urban Civil Rights Museum in Harlem. When the Urban Civil Rights Museum in Harlem opens, it will be New York's first museum dedicated to civil rights and one of the first in the nation focused on the history of civil rights in the North. It will share the stories of the long and ongoing struggle for justice and civil rights and include galleries about the transatlantic slave trade, the development of free black settlements in the North, the two waves of the Great Migration, and of course the Harlem Renaissance. And we will bring this history and these stories up to the present, to the 21st century, because we know the struggle is not over. Our hope is that it will be a place where you can see and feel the work of the many people who fought for justice in urban centers in the North, to reflect on past civil rights efforts, to imagine new possibilities in collective work, and to inspire future action together collectively. Like many of you in the room, the museum hopes to be a steward of untold stories and to join our colleagues and friends in Harlem and beyond to preserve and share the marginalized and erased stories of our rich community histories. And I've only been working with the National Urban League for less than 3 years, and one of the things that's been really exciting is to see the Urban League add to their repertoire history as a part of their social justice mission, which we know is a big part of the story and of the civil rights struggle. On that note, I'm delighted to be here representing our collaboration with this incredible Juneteenth program on New York African American burial grounds. As a public historian and curator, I spent many years recovering and interpreting Black history in New York City, and have found in particular that Black cemeteries tell us so much about our lives, Black life, and our stories. I also worked at the Weeksville Heritage Center for about 10 years, and I want to add that Weeksville also has a cemetery that was run over by Eastern Parkway, and so I'm happy to share that research and information with all of you and add that to the coalition, which is really important part of our stories and landscape. I still think that the New York City African Burial Ground in Lower Manhattan, which has been mentioned already multiple times, is one of the most important rediscoveries in Black history in the past 30+ years, and one of the most important community fights for its preservation. The community struggle, as many of us know in this room, to save the African burial ground is the only reason the site and memorial exists today, that people fought for it, and the only reason that we still know about this important history. The public awareness that these sites are trying to raise and the community histories that they are trying to restore and preserve are valuable contributions to our larger story, and they need our full support and attention. This is an exciting topic and needed discussion, and I hope as your new neighbor in Harlem, the Urban League can partner on many more programs and initiatives. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Now, before we get started, I'll walk through our program for the evening. We'll start out with our introductions from our panelists, and I'll ask each panelist to describe their project in about 2 to 3 minutes. And following that, we'll have our panel discussion where I'll ask our guests some questions about the work that they've been doing. As you walked in the building, I believe you received an index card, and there you can write some questions down for the panelists after the discussion has concluded. We'll have our staff coming around and just raise your hands and they'll collect your question so I can ask our panelists. After that, we'll have our Q&A session for about 15 minutes and then we'll close the event. All right, and with that, I'll now introduce our distinguished panelists. So starting off, we have Peggy King-Yorday, who is a consultant for African burial grounds across the city. I'll ask Peggy King if you can share about the work that you've been doing as a consultant.
Oh, okay. I'm Peggy King-Yorday. I'm a cultural projects consultant. My career started with the African Burial Ground project in Lower Manhattan. I worked for Mayor Dinkins and I was his special advisor on the project. And that project changed my life and the course of my career. And I dedicate my career and all of the work that I do on preserving African burial grounds globally. So I've done work in the South Atlantic, on the island of St. Helena. I've done work also in the Dutch Caribbean and throughout the United States. I basically do work in reparative justice, in saving African burial grounds and working with communities and getting them to focus on memorialization, defining what it is for them. And as a matter of fact, on some of these projects, I served as a key consultant.
All right, thank you. Next, representing the Harlem African Burial Ground Initiative, we have Sharon Wilkins. As many of you may know, the Harlem African Burial Ground Initiative is a community-led effort to advocate for the remembrance and honoring of the Harlem African Burial Ground, which is located off East 126th Street in East Harlem. I'll now ask Ms. Wilkins to share a bit more about the work she's been doing with the Harlem African Burial Ground.
Well, my work just under the Harlem African Burial Ground began in 2009. And what had happened at that point was the city of New York was getting ready to do some bridge work in East Harlem near the Harlem River. And when the surveyors and the construction team and the architects opened up the maps and the plans, they said, uh-oh, we have to stop work because there's an instance of burials. So they went to the descendant church. As many of you may know, it was free and enslaved Africans who literally built the approximately 9-mile road from the first Dutch colony, New Netherlands, up to New Haarlem. And so the original church was called the Low Dutch Reformed Church of Harlem, and the successor church became the Elmendorf Reformed Church. So in 2009, they came to the church and they said, oh, by the way, we found that there's the possibility of an African burial ground. And of course, the pastor of the church said, "Oh yes, we know all about that." So she summoned, political officials, neighborhood people, professionals like myself, to join her in her quest to reclaim, recapture, and memorialize this particular site. I came to the project not only because of my interest in history, but as a state certified public historian. The bulk of my career had been in not-for-profit administration, so developing all kinds of programs, coordinating with government and organizations, addressing issues, social and health and other issues from birth to senior citizens. So I had a lot of experience in working and collaborating with a number of organizations, and clearly knowing the history of this country, the history of the state and the city, that burial spaces that pertain to the African American community, the African American diaspora, is so important. It's been uncovered because we could not own property, we could not purchase property, because we were thought that we were made to think that we were less than and subhuman humans. Our history was covered over. The traditional way of dealing with burial grounds was to hope that nobody knew about it, hope that there was no documentation, and then pave over it and put a parking lot, or a building on top. And so, this is the history of what had happened to African burial grounds. And luckily, as was indicated before, with the emergence and knowledge about the Lower Manhattan African burial ground, that came to make a reawakening of interest, intellect, commitment to the real history, because Black history is American history. And so, there became changes in the science, the archaeology, the culture, the recognition of some sites. So my engagement, our collective engagement, has been very important for, in Peggy's case, and mine too, because I worked on Lower Manhattan, I worked on Seneca Village in Central Park, and now Harlem African Burial Ground. So it's long-standing, but it's very important, and I think everyone sitting here on this panel is very committed to the work that we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wilkins. Next, we have the African Burial Ground National Monument. And this is an African burial ground in Lower Manhattan that commemorates the estimated 15,000 freed and enslaved Africans who were buried there between the 17th and 18th centuries. And so this monument's mission is to preserve and protect the sacred space and also honor those who were buried there. And it also serves as a place of remembrance and also education about the history of slavery throughout New York City as well as the United States. Representing the African Burial Ground National Monument, we have Rodney Leon, who is the founder and principal of Rodney Leon Architects. Yeah, we can clap, yeah. He's best known for designing the African Burial Ground Monument in New York City, and also for winning the reward of the Arc of Return in the United Nations competition. Oh. I'll invite Rodney Leon to say a few more words about his work on the National African Burial Ground Monument.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here this evening amongst you all and also so many distinguished guests. Again, my name is Rodney Leon. I'm born and raised here in New York City, and have been very interested, even from the time when I was a student, in the culture of the African diaspora, which led me to investigate further ideas about transatlanticity, the concept of African culture and its expansion throughout the global hemisphere, especially the Western Hemisphere, and how that translated. And I was looking early on for a way to express our African culture through architecture. When I was in graduate school, the African Burial Ground site was founded, and became aware of its presence and entered a competition which was an ideas competition with some friends of mine in graduate school. Coming out of graduate school, we went to the competition for the actual burial ground, and were able to be blessed with the opportunity to work on that project and stand on the shoulders of greats like Peggy, who had initiated a lot of the work under the Dyckman's administration, and also with Sharon. So the project was built and completed in 2007. It's Christian, and its name is the Ancestral Libation Chamber. It contains 7 elements. For those of you who are aware of the site, it's that quarter acre site in Lower Manhattan on Duane Street between Foley Square and Broadway. When you see this site, you see that quarter acre site. Many people still don't realize that it's actually about a 16th of the site of the actual National Monument and Burial Ground site in Lower Manhattan, which extends actually all the way from Broadway, all the way to Foley Square, slightly further north of the site, and slightly south towards City Hall and Duane Street by City Hall, which is actually closer to Chambers Street. And one of the things that I think most people don't realize nationally or even locally is the mythology around slavery being predominantly a Southern institution. And that site, where an estimated many thousands of burials are currently estimated to contain, it just shows you the fact that African people were here from the founding and inception of New York City, and actually are the ones that are primarily responsible for the construction of New York City. And this is something which is kind of like an open secret, right? There's so much history and culture in Lower Manhattan from the times of the founding of the Dutch and Manhattan itself. And we're very blessed with the opportunity to be able to participate in actually bringing truth and actually extending that history to this current generations, and awareness to these current generations of young people who might not be aware of that, and to pass on that knowledge. I've also had the opportunity to design the permanent memorial to the victims of slavery and the transatlantic slave trade at the United Nations, called the Ark of Return. A lot of people don't necessarily, New York City, the United Nations is in New York City, but a lot of people don't necessarily see it as an extension of New York City. It's a very important place, especially in regards to bringing awareness of our history in a kind of a global way, and the impact of the transatlantic slave trade being acknowledged by the United Nations, I think, starts to bring those kind of international connections, and that awareness of that African connection, that international connection of our diaspora to groups of people that currently visit the United Nations Plaza. Lastly, I have also working with a group in Georgetown in Washington, D.C. on a historic African American cemetery for the Mount Zion Female Union Band Society. Many people don't know the history of the blacks in Washington, D.C. African American community in Washington, D.C. was very strong historically, and through gentrification, Georgetown has lost a lot of that history. So there's an organization called Black Georgetown that we are helping to transform that cemetery into a memorial park and garden, so that history can also be communicated. And in the context of just like Washington, D.C., one of the biggest, I think, tragedies is that we don't have a national monument to slavery in Washington, D.C. So, as a professor, one of the things that I did was I established a studio around studying the history of slavery and proposing for a national monument to slavery in Washington, D.C. So those are some of the things we're working on currently.
Thank you so much, Mr. Leon. Next, we have the Dyckman Farmhouse Museum Alliance. The Dyckman Farmhouse Museum's mission is to support the preservation of the historic site and also be a catalyst for engaging with adventuresome programming, and to be a good neighbor and a dynamic resource for the community. I will now ask our panelist, Melissa Cuvite, to talk a bit more about her work at the Dyckman Farmhouse Museum Alliance.
Since 2015, the Dyckman Farmhouse Museum Alliance has worked to research the history of enslavement on the property once occupied by the Dyckman family. and shift its focus to become a community-centered museum that tells the story of all people who lived and worked in what is now known as the Inwood neighborhood. As part of that effort, the museum has been working with the community to raise awareness of the enslaved burial site in Inwood, which is also a Lenape ceremonial site. That site was used by the Dyckman, Nagel, and other families, and the site was unceremoniously dug up in the early 1900s by some amateur archaeologists. And as you might imagine, the remains that were not treated with respect and were either looted or given to scientists. And so as the museum entered this era of change in its interpretation, it was important that the history of the burial site also be known. So the museum staff worked with the Public School 98, whose parking lot stands on top of the burial site, and local artists to acknowledge the site and begin to reckon with this history. And between 2015 and 2020, the museum took part in a press conference about the site alongside local elected officials, and worked with PS 98 to erect a plaque in front of the school as a way to memorialize and pay homage to the site. But in 2020, the site directly next to PS 98, which had been an auto body shop, was also which was also placed on top of the site, was bought by the Bowery Residence Committee, also known as BRC. For more than 50 years, BRC has worked with the city's unhoused population to create and deliver a wide range of treatment services. The Inwood site was set to become a transitional shelter designed to provide shelter and resources to people as they work toward finding permanent housing. As the company began to prepare the site, they became aware of its history as a ceremonial site and a burial ground and stopped work immediately. Not knowing how to proceed, the executive director, Muzzy Rosenblatt, called upon his relationship with Peggy King Yorda, a consultant with decades of experience, as you have seen. And together, Ms. King Yorda and BRC engaged a team of archaeologists to survey the site for any remains, of which there were none found. And upon completion of the survey, BRC hosted a large gathering of descendant communities, at which time land acknowledgement, libation, and consecration ceremonies were held. BRC and Ms. King Yorda then engaged the Dyckman Farmhouse Museum as a community anchor and cultural institution to work together on a community engagement campaign surrounding the use of the site. Together, the museum, BRC, and Ms. King Yorda located community representation to create an advisory group for the Inwood sacred site. Along with this group, a series of virtual conversations were held with community members. And from these conversations, the advisory group was tasked with compiling the feedback and making recommendations for use of the site. Their 8-page report detailed how the community felt the space could be best utilized to memorialize and honor its history, serve the current community, and have permanence for communities of the future. From this report, BRC and DFMA, with the guidance again of Ms. King Yorda, began to work through a plan for part of the site to serve as a shelter while the other part would be set aside for the memorial. BRC and Dyckman Farmhouse Museum have entered into a memorandum of understanding to work together to construct the site and act as stewards in perpetuity. Also during this work, through research by Ms. King Yorda, 7 partial remains have been located at the American Museum of Natural History, and thanks to Ms. King Yorda working with their repatriation department, the museum has agreed to repatriate the remains and reinter them on the site once the build-out is complete.
Wow. All right, thank you so much, Melissa. And now I'll just click through a few of the photos that you've provided, and if you don't mind, I'm sharing a bit more about the work. So this is the farmhouse, I believe?
Yeah, this is the museum at 204 and Broadway.
Mm-hmm.
This is the press conference and the plaque that we erected in front of PS 98. This is the auto body shop on that site that BRC purchased. And this is the design for the new site.
Wow, beautiful. All right, next up we have the Flatbush African Burial Ground Coalition. The Flatbush African Burial Ground arose in late June 2021 from the conviction that the campaign to protect the Flatbush African Burial Ground should be led explicitly under Black leadership and must serve Black and Indigenous stewardship at the site. Representing the Flatbush African Burial Ground, we have President of the Coalition, Samantha Bernardine. I'll now let her speak about her work.
Good evening, everyone. How is everyone doing? Amazing. One of the things that we do at the Flatbush African Burial Ground is that we acknowledge the original stewards of this land, which is the Lenape people. So we always give honor to them, and Lenape means the people. And part of our research is that specifically the Canarsie indigenous people were the stewards of the original site of where our burial ground is in Flatbush, Brooklyn. So I'm Samantha Bernardine. I am the president of the Flatbush African Burial Ground Coalition, also known as FABGC. I am an original Brooklynite with Caribbean roots from the island of Grenada, and an educator. And how we found out that the site located on the corner of Bedford and Church Avenue was a burial ground was actually through my principal. I teach at the High School for Youth and Community Development at Erasmus campus. And my principal had informed me that there was going to be a task force during the pandemic. So I just want to put that out there. So 2020, October, we're all in lockdown doing online learning, and my principal says that I need you to be part of this task force with the mayor and the city councilman at the time that represented our area, and that the city was planning to put housing next to our school. And let me just say that Erasmus is one of the oldest educational institution in New York, in Brooklyn. If you ever been to Flatbush, there's called the White House, which was the original structure of Erasmus High School. We did not understand why would the city put housing next to a high school. So I attended, and within the first 20 minutes of the presenters saying that, by the way, kind of similar to what everyone else and those who are about to present, there's a burial ground next to your building. And I was like, wait a minute, that makes no sense to me. And that's where the activism started. The coalition came about by a number of individuals, educators, community activists, residents, students that did not understand why would the city of New York build a structure that once held a structure there, knowing that there was a burial ground there, and specifically amongst, on top of indigenous people and people of African descent. And again, for those who don't know Flatbush, Brooklyn, we are also a little Caribbean. So you're talking about our ancestors that we have continuously represent each and every day. I made the decision right there and then that I may get fired, and that would be fine. So I let my principal know that this would be my work. And with the amazing collaboration of Shauna Sabio, who is the president, co-president, co-founder of Grow House, Allison Martinez, co-founder of Brooklyn Level Up, Chantel Jones, who is also an educator, and our amazing partnership with Brooklyn College with Kelly Brett. We all, as well as other volunteers, felt that this was necessary. And within I would say about 6 months to 10, we were able to stop the city of New York from building housing on top of that sacred site. And that came together through activism. That came together during a pandemic. We did not care about distance because we were too far distant from our history. We were too far removed from our history. So if there was ever something that was worthy of the pandemic, was finding out this news and having the time, and when you give people the time, they will show you their energy. And that's exactly what we did. And we can say without a shadow of a doubt that there would not be housing built on that sacred land. However, now the site is under the portfolio of the Parks Department, and we are now working with the Parks Department to give true honor and respect and acknowledgement for those who, in my eyes, paved the way for us to be here. Our history is consistently being erased. And I know as we're having this discussion, we will talk more about it, but it takes a village. It takes us getting upset and mad in order for our history to be seen and to be heard. So with that, I give great honor, especially being at the Schomburg at 100 years. This is amazing. And to know that there are burial grounds that we have been walking on for years, for decades, and not realizing that our ancestors are really shouting out to us, please speak for us. Speak up, because we need you to hear us. We need to be acknowledged. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Bernardine. That was beautiful. Next, we have the Hunts Point Slave Burial Ground project. The Hunts Point Slave Burial Ground is a project that seeks to definitively locate and commemorate the lives of slaves who have been buried in the Hunts Point Burial Ground in the Bronx. Though many of the graves have been destroyed, their lives will be remembered. And so now I'll have our representative, Justin Zarka, who is a National Board Certified Teacher and also representative of the Hunts Point Slave Burial Ground project, talk a bit more about the work that's being done.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you to the panel and EDC and Harlem African Burial Ground for organizing this event, for bringing us together, make connections, and to learn from each other. Like you, I'm a teacher at an elementary school in Hunts Point, and a couple of years ago, back in 2013, a photograph was sent to me by Phil Paneritis, who ended up becoming co-founder of this project that we ended up calling the Hunts Point Slave Burial Ground Project. And in this photograph, you just saw some rough-hewn stones, and it looks like some marsh in the background. And I've always liked historical photographs, but that was it. And then this photograph was found in the Museum of the City of New York's archives. And when you turned it over to the verso, the back side of it, that's when it really piqued my interest, because it said slave burying ground. There's just information. And then it said Hunts Point Road, a place that doesn't exist today, but it seemed to exist possibly a block from where I work for the last, at that time, 10 years. Now it's been 23 years. And that led us along a journey of looking up different documents, like you see on the screen here, of where there's this information that possibly there was this burial ground located across from what is currently in a city park called Drake Park, where there is white landowners and slaveholders have a nice fenced, gated cemetery. There was supposedly another one, and like others have mentioned before, you started hearing from people, oh yeah, there was something there, so what? And it became kind of a rallying call for myself and other educators that not so what, but this is something that we ought to be digging into and looking into more. And it's become an educational project for our elementary students ever since. We've geared the project towards always finding educational opportunities for students to engage in authentic learning. They've engaged in archaeological research alongside Jessica McLean, who is in the audience right now, to research the area and document it, that helped utilize a report that helped to definitively say that, yes, the work that fourth graders had done along the way with the support of many people, both educators, community activists, that yes, there was another burial ground here, and it's one that needed to be remembered. In our school, as you see on the screen here, is an elementary school. 30% of our students, they come to our school and they don't even speak English yet. And we use this curriculum at times in order to help them learn about the history of our country, the history of their neighborhood. It's an opportunity to learn language. It's an opportunity to learn service learning. It's advocacy, and it's been a rewarding experience. And there's a lot that needs to still be done, but the site has local, state, and national historic preservation status as of now. Yet, if you were to walk to the space, you would only know if you looked at a very large park sign with a very small font that there was something of significance there. And that took a long battle to get that written even. And so there's still a lot of effort to be made, and I'm looking forward to learning from everyone here and to move this forward in a way that makes sure that is both digitally and physically remembered in a way that the lives of the people are acknowledged, known, and celebrated, and integrated into the history of who we are.
Thank you. And lastly, but not least, we have the Van Cortlandt Park Alliance. The Van Cortlandt Park Alliance is along the eastern edge of the Kingsbridge Burial Ground, and this area has been identified as a site where both enslaved and freed Africans who have lived there on the Van Cortlandt family plantation. They were responsible for its function and the economic gains for over 100 years, and according to records, there are also several indigenous people who are buried there. I'll now invite Ashley Hart-Adams, who is the Arts Integration Strategist for the Van Cortlandt Park Alliance, to talk a bit more about the work that they've been doing.
Thank you so much. I want to start off by saying that I'm so thrilled to be back here at the Schomburg Center. I actually am a former junior scholars instructor. Thank you. So I spent many Saturday mornings in this very room, and it means a lot to me. I want to thank the Schomburg for hosting us and to all the partners for having us here today. I'm Ashley Hart-Adams. I'm the Arts Integration Strategist at Van Cortlandt Park Alliance, and I'm honored to speak with you today about the Reimagining the Enslaved African Burial Ground in Van Cortlandt Park project. This is a community-led project grounded in truth-telling, healing, and honoring the lives of those who lived and labored on Van Cortlandt Plantation, what is now the public parkland Van Cortlandt Park in the Bronx. In the 1870s, construction workers unearthed skeletal remains just beyond the historic Van Cortlandt House while working on the construction of the New York and Northern Railroad. In 1879, a local man named Caleb Van Tassel recalled making a coffin for a slave who was buried there. This account was supported by J.B. James, who spent his youth around Van Cortlandt Lake, which has actually since been renamed to Hester and Piero's Mill Pond. This renaming they were renamed after two enslaved Africans who worked on the plantation. And he wrote in his 1935 memoir that a great number of skeletons of former slaves were unearthed there during the construction of the railroad. This discovery prompted deeper research, including a ground-penetrating radar study, and what we found confirmed what many community members had long suspected. Van Cortlandt Park is the final resting place of enslaved African people who labored on Van Cortlandt Plantation. Yet until recently, this vital and painful history had gone largely unrecognized in the landscape. So in partnership with New York City Parks and Bronx community leaders, historians, artists, and what we kind of call parks people, we've created this legacy council. Van Cortlandt Park Alliance is reimagining how public space can acknowledge this legacy with dignity. This isn't just about creating a memorial, it's about redefining what remembrance can look like when we partner with the community. In phase one of this project, we will engage the community through workshops, tours, cultural events, and we're really asking people, how do you want this history to be honored? What should it feel like when you stand in a space that holds the memory of those who were enslaved? and their responses will shape the foundation for a design ideas competition that will launch later this year. The winning design idea will be informed not just by aesthetics, but by values like respect for land, respect for ancestors, environmental stewardship, accessibility, liberation, and much more. So this project really isn't just about our past, it's about the future that we're building, one where public spaces can really reflect the full truth of our shared history, and where remembrance is not passive, but active and community-centered. If you want to receive more information about how you can engage in the community engagement process of this, these flyers are in the lobby, and if you scan the QR code in the back, you can sign up to receive additional information. And my last plug will be that we would love to have you join our Juneteenth celebration this Thursday in Van Cortlandt Park. It starts on the lawn of the Van Cortlandt House Museum, and we're actually going to be doing a procession to the burial ground, and I'm emceeing, so I hope we can see you there.
All right, thank you all so much for those really powerful and informative introductions. I'll now start with the questions that we have prepared, but also I would love this to be a dialogue, so panelists, if you have anything to respond to with what other panelists have said, feel free to do so. To start out, I'll start with Ms. King-Yorter. I wanted to know, what sort of strategies did you find, most effective for trying to build a coalition of support around the burial ground? What sort of advocacy did you have to do to make sure folks actually recognize that the site was there?
I think that, at the time I was working for the Mayor's Office of Construction, overseeing capital construction projects throughout the city of New York, all the cultural institutions, so any construction happening at any museum or any of those things. In terms of building advocacy, I tended to start, because I was working for government, within government. So I was engaging in actions that weren't necessarily permitted within the government framework. I was doing a lot of coloring outside the lines, activism within that framework. But it got to a point, clearly, that there was only so much you could do within government. You got the ears of certain people. But then it got to a point where we needed to take some of the information to other political people outside of the office that I was working in and share that information. And these were elected officials who had a following within the community, within the Harlem community, within the Brooklyn community, and speaking to them, and basically providing them, in this case, it was Senator David Patterson, having secret meetings to provide him with all of the ammunition to take out to the community to galvanize the community. That ended up being part of the strategy. An article would appear every now and then in the newspaper, but I always tell people and the communities that I work in, it did not happen overnight. An article would appear, there was interest, but it takes a whole lot to get the attention of the community in a place like New York City, right? You can't even get people to turn a corner if they're walking on Broadway, unless there's something really compelling down the street, right? So in terms of getting people to come out, it did take political motivators, people tapping into their constituency and coming out in that way. And then there were community groups that also galvanized student groups to come out and protest. At the time when I was the advisor to the mayor, I was pregnant with my first child, and I got a call. You have to come to the construction truck, because at that time, the federal government was under watch, and I had to come, and Sonny Carson was in the trailer, and I had to go and sort of, navigate and negotiate between the federal government and what the community wanted. So it takes a variety of approaches, and I will just close with this in terms of my response regarding advocacy. Every community is distinct and unique. that means that every community has a certain threshold. And that threshold will determine how best to approach preserving projects like this. So there are a number of things that come into play, and I think that whenever you come into a community, you've got to take a look at the folks, you've got to meet them where they are, you have to find out what folks are willing to do, and very quickly by example, I worked with a community outside of Atlanta, Georgia, my home state. I'm from Albany, Georgia, Southwest Georgia, I'm not a New Yorker. And that community was working within a town that had the most incredible racist history ever, and the KKK was ever present, with the Confederate soldier in the middle of the town. I could not do what we did here. What happened here started a movement, and people want to, in the spirit of the movement that happened in New York, they want to do this, but it can't always be done the same way. So you don't have necessarily the numbers of people, you don't have the threshold. Some folks wanted to preserve a burial ground, but they were afraid. It's a small town, they might lose their jobs. So you meet the community where they are, and you find out who the assets are. When I say who the assets are, what the organizations, whether it's the Urban League, fraternities, sororities, you find out where their strengths are, you work with them and within their community. And in the case of the Newton, Georgia piece, they were a small group because there were a lot of people who were very, very afraid of losing jobs or being targeted in the community. So we staged a march because we needed the biggest bang for our buck. And so the way to do it was, the way to get press out was to have a march from the cemetery to downtown underneath the Confederate soldier. And that's how we were able to get the attention of the folks that needed the attention. And so I flew down to work with them and to organize that and to march with them.
Wonderful. And thank you for sharing. So yeah, it sounds like it was a multitude of strategies with community, like grassroots organizations, but also the higher ups in government. I wanted to pass it on to Sharon as well. I know government has been involved as well with the Harlem African Burial Ground. Can you share a bit about how that partnership came to be?
I would mirror some of the things that Peggy King Yorda said, because when you embark on a project like this, that the history of which is grounded in racism, suppression, supremacy of one community over another, and very deep-seated and often painful, sometimes unacknowledged, not understood issues, it's a massive undertaking. So it takes knowledge of government, knowledge of how policies are developed. It takes advocacy and collaboration across many sectors. We reached out to church leaders in the beginning, to local elected officials at both the state, city, and federal level. The newly deceased Congressman Charles Rangel was very involved. Other politicos were very, very involved. So there was a broad cross-section of people, because we knew in order to start a movement, to start recognition of this, we had to have many touch points and many people that we needed to dialogue with, talk to, advocate with. And so that's how it started. Because of my professional background was very broad-based and I already knew how to do these things, I was able to help the church reach out to a number of these resources. One of the things that we needed to do was to negotiate with the MTA, because they were the owners of that space. And the burial ground, Harlem African Burial Ground, was in use from the 17th to the 19th centuries. It was only in the early 1860s, when the Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx was inaugurated, that outreach went to the descendants of Europeans to ask if they would want their families disinterred and reinterred up in Woodlawn. No such accommodation was given to any of the black families. And so they remained in place. And the site itself was variously used as, a casino and a beer garden and a military barracks and on and on and on and on, various uses, but forgotten. So, when we started working on this, we knew that we needed to effect a very broad-based, committed, erudite coalition of people who knew how to get things done. It is not easy, but if you have, the right mixture of people, you have the political will, you have the expertise, you can bring together a large advocacy movement, but it takes work and commitment to do these things, and that's what we did, and that's what we've been doing, since then. I was part of the process to have MTA decommission the site so that it could be turned back to the city. There are, certain designations, whether they're landmarks or historic preservation. I was chosen to go to Albany to negotiate for the register of the burial ground on the National Register of Historic Places, and I was successful, and so it is now registered on the National Register of Historic Places, but it takes a lot of work, commitment, and collaboration to do these things.
Thank you, Ms. Wilkins. And before we continue, I just want to remind folks we have our staff here collecting questions, and we'll do our best to answer the questions at the end of this discussion. So feel free to raise your hand with your index card if you have a question for the panelists. Now, to continue, I want to pass it over to Mr. Leon if you have any reactions to this idea about partnership and combining sort of the community grassroots effort with local government.
Yeah, so, in extending the narrative around the African burial ground in Lower Manhattan, recently, I've led an effort to establish an African Burial Ground Memorial Foundation in partnership with the National Park Service. We've maintained a connection with the site informally over the last, since 2008, that's 15 years or so, or more. And one of the things that became very obvious is that, during the initial phases of preparation, political activism, planning, design and construction, that's only a tiny fraction of the life of these historic sites. What really is important is what happens afterwards, even after the establishment of, let's say, kind of like a memorial or an interpretive center or something like that. How do you maintain a really vibrant, interactive connection with communities long-term? So one of the things that we were able to do was to tap into some of our relationships with folks that we've had initially from the design phase on, relationships that are ongoing over many years, like relationships with Peggy and with Sharon, as well as relationships with people within the National Park Service as a formal government organization to build trust between the community and the organization, the National Parks itself, the government organization. And we found that, it takes time, but we've been able to be a kind of like a quiet advocate in some cases in order to bring certain awareness to the significance of the site through tapping into elected officials as well and making them aware, and tapping into resources that a lot of people might not necessarily are aware of that you can get from congressional officials or local elected officials in the city level. So we've had partnerships with Congressman Dan Goldman, Adriana Espiat up in Harlem as well has been a great kind of like partner and advocate for us. We've been able to get resolutions and community board to make sure that some of the buildings around the burial ground be preserved for community use, future museums, and as opposed to for luxury high-rise apartments and commercial development, because under the Bloomberg administration there was attempts to sell some city-owned land on the burial ground in order to develop it, and that was able to be stopped. So these are kinds of things that you want to maintain a kind of like a consistent advocacy and support through grassroots efforts over time, and then hopefully ultimately start to institutionalize those grassroots efforts in a way that you can then begin to build long-term conservancies or foundations and groups, many of which are now in the grassroots stage right now. I think we've been able to build a certain kind of like a knowledge over the last 10 or 15 years or so around how that can be done. And last year we were able to sign a philanthropic partnership agreement with the National Park Service, which gives us a kind of like a special status in terms of building the foundation and representing the site in a way that it's much easier to do than if you're kind of like an unofficial group. So, you know, I think, you know, we've learned a lot of lessons in that process, and we're still learning, but we're happy to kind of share with other folks as well in terms of like how can we institutionalize the grassroots effort throughout the different burial grounds throughout the city, whether it's, you know, Flatbush or in Van Cortlandt Park or, you know, other parts of the city that people are not even aware exist right now, and then become a kind of like a network of historic burial ground sites, and then make it much stronger, so to speak. There has to be, I think, also a lot more of a long-term awareness campaign around the significance of these sites, so that when people come to these different boroughs throughout the city, that these become places that people don't shun, but they become places that are going to be sites of interest for tourists, for school tours, for tours of people that are visiting from out of town or from different parts of the world. So one of the main things that we're trying to do now is to think about not just building the board, but also kind of like increasing its awareness so that it becomes more of a pilgrimage place. And also making sure that the site is integrated into the historical curriculum of the schools. So we've also partnered with certain activists in the New York City education public schools for them to begin to integrate the African burial ground into like the curriculum in any way that it can. So these are some of the things that we're doing and some of the lessons that we've learned.
Thank you so much. I'd like to open it up for the rest of the panel. If you have any initial reactions or other strategies you would like to suggest? Ms. Bernardine?
Yes. One of the things that I want to say is when you're finding out about burial grounds is that there's two different entities. There is government-owned land, and then there's private land. And that determines how you're going to advocate for that site and for the memorial of the people who are no longer with us, right? So for Flatbush Burialground, we were in some ways lucky, and that's not the right word to use, but for this time period, we'll use that the space is owned by the city of New York. We were contacted by an organization of advocates in Maryland that found out that there was a property not far from their town that was allegedly an African burial ground, and when they did research, they found out that it was. However, the property was privately owned. So their ways of advocating to keep that site as a memorial site for enslaved freemen was difficult for them. And they reached out to many different people to find out how could they inform the community and how could they get back ownership of that land. So I wanted to be crystal clear that this work, as stated, is hard work. And I would add, outside of commitment, you have to be prepared to sacrifice. Us as a members of the coalition, we sacrificed a lot of our time, our energy, in many cases, our lives, to preserve the burial ground site, that sacred site. Because not all skin folks are kinfolks. I don't know if people ever heard that term before. Just because we share certain things doesn't mean that we are all for the people. And we have to question, we have to ask for help. And I'm one who doesn't like to ask for help that much. I think I can do it all, but as I get older, I realize I cannot. But we also have to question those who want to help. What are their alternative motives? Are they there for the reasons that we think they are? And once we find that out, use them. I'm very realistic when it comes down to certain things. My students always complain that you're doing too much, Ms. B. But it's real. These sites, these sacred spaces are being used by others and having who in many cases know the history behind it and not acknowledging the fact that there were once human beings there. One of the things I did not say in my opening is that on our site, when Flatbush was entering into Brooklyn and into the city of New York, incorporating what the city of New York is today, they built a school on top of the burial ground. That was the Flatbush Village School. And then it became a public school. And later on, it was developed again with a brick structure, from wood to brick structure. And that school became another public school, and then it became a school for Jewish boys, and then a school for Jewish girls, and then it got abandoned. And the community was always asking, what is this building? And how can we purchase that building? Because at the time, the school district where the burial ground is, we had a majority of Black and brown children who were basically spilling out of their schools. And we were looking for buildings to build schools. And no one could give us an answer. So it was through the pandemic of finding out that this was a burial ground is when we discovered that the city of New York knew all this time what that building was. The building was originally, after it was abandoned, was supposed to be given to the Caribbean community to create a Caribbean museum by the state of New York. And there was funding, but I'm pretty sure all of us can say the funding all of a sudden disappeared. And when the money disappears, the ideas disappeared. And that building wound up becoming dilapidated and had to be torn down. So in 2015, 2016, when the building was demolished, it was in the process of being a historical site. But now that the structure is no longer there and it's just a paved site, they felt that development should be placed there and to build housing. The other thing I wanted to mention in regards to ownership is the involvement of the church. Now, people of color, Black people, especially in Harlem, we all about church. We in church Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Fish Friday, all of them, right? Church plays so much of an important role in advocacy. The ironic thing about our burial ground is that the Dutch Reformed Church, which is up the block from the African burial ground, still is there, still preserved. The owners are buried there. The plaques are still there. The headstones are still there. However, when it came down to us, we have nothing but a gate around this site. And for the coalition, that is what we are fighting with the city, to make sure that we are properly acknowledged, that we are properly recognized. This work requires extensive partnership. But before you go and decide that, yes, I want to be involved, understand that you're going to have to make certain sacrifices. That is part of leadership. However, it is so rewarding to be able to say that we fought the city of New York, one of the greatest cities in this country, is an amazing feat. But then you have to get up the next day, put on your boots, and fight another fight. Because this is a long marathon. And especially when we have individuals who are currently in certain leadership positions who have blatantly said that our existence does not matter, that our existence is not important, that is irrelevant, if there is ever a time for us to stand up and say, no, where's my boots? Where's my cane? Where's my pen? Where's my phone? It's the time now. And I hope that with the partnership that we all will establish, that we are working together not as competitors, but as an extensive of one. We have to work together because there are many people who are banking on us dividing each other, especially when it comes down to money, especially when it comes down to keywords like supportive housing, when it comes down to economic development. What exactly does that mean? And we have to hold political leaders accountable when they come into our communities and say that they're going to do something, and when elected, do the opposite, or tell you that, I'm sorry, but I didn't know that that's not how the game works. No, baby. The game started the minute you came and you asked me for your vote. The game started when you asked me to be a partner for you. Now I need you to be a partner for me. I need you to be a partner for us. I need you to be a partner for our ancestors who paved the way for us to be here. That's where that comes from. So advocacy can come from many ways. And for young people, they love the tea. For those who may know what that means, it means the gossip. And when I tell students, do you know that we're next to a burial ground? The first thing is, there's dead people there? Are they gonna come? And they literally jump. And it's like, no, pause, relax yourself. But there are people who were once there. There were people who paved the way here. I cannot be an educator and contradict myself by saying to my students, my black and brown students, you are amazing, you are important, you are valuable, and I don't do nothing for the information that I know next door to me. Last thing I would say, in the early 2000s, it was the last time that the space, the site was digged up, and it was found, the archaeologists found a jawbone and 3 human teeth. They were able to do DNA testing, and they found that the individuals who had passed away were under the age of 12, and that they died of malnutrition. Not everyone in the community knew that. We still, to this day, do not know where those remains are. We have been reaching out to the Dutch Reformed Church to find out if they have it. We have been reaching out to city officials to find out if they can assist us in finding out where those remains are, because we would love to give it a proper burial.
All right,
the
thank you.
work is really important.
Sorry, we're running
There
up
you
on
go.
time.
No
so
problem.
I'll have to cut you off, but thank you. So we'll only have time for about 2 questions. However, we will keep track of the questions that were given to us, and we'll post it on our website. So that'll be at edc.nyc/HAGB for the Harlem African Burial Ground. So you can expect to see the answer to the rest of the questions by the end of this week. To start with our Q&A, I want to start with some of the panelists who haven't had a chance to speak yet. Justin, how's your experience been involving young people in your efforts, especially? How have you been able to explain sort of this sacred history of the burial ground, and how have they reacted to it?
I teach in an elementary school in Hunts Point. It's on the edge of an industrial park, and it's one of the lowest economic districts in our city, our nation, and working with the students is the only not the only reason, but it's the critical reason for why I do it. There's students who, many of them are not even born here. They're students who are excited to learn, they're excited to be here, and they want to grow. And this is a project where it gave them opportunities to engage in authentic learning opportunities long-term in order to access careers that they typically may not be exposed to. And it's been exciting to develop curriculum that approaches their social, emotional, and their prior knowledge. I mean, we've taught students who are 5 years old through 11 years old, primarily in our school, and the critical question we tended to ask when we started any unit of study related to the story of 3 blocks from their school, the Hunts Point State Burial Ground, and the related park that it's next to in this industrial area is, how do we remember, and what do we choose to remember? And we would do a lot of asking our students, even from the youngest ages, like, how do you remember your loved ones? What are ways, if they were to pass away, what do you do? And a lot of the typical answers would be like, well, we have songs, and we come together as a family, we have headstones, and we even created memorial quilts where students will paint and draw and put them together. And this leads to a large question that we next pose, which would be, well, what if there wasn't a way to remember them? And the way in which a 7-year-old or 8-year-old responds to that is still painful. And then you introduce documents, and you introduce the story of what is our one story here in this one burial ground, which I'm looking forward to expanding it as we make connections across here on this panel and beyond, to make sure that this is a story that's not just in silo here, a silo here, a silo here, but like this is part of a larger story, and it's a connected story, and it's not just our collective story here is not just its own side story, but it is deeply woven into any angle we want to look at American history or American now or American future. But again, it always went back to, what do we choose to remember, and how do you remember your loved ones?
Thank you. And for our last question, I'll pass it to Melissa and Ashley. Can you talk a bit about how the African diaspora has been involved in the work that you've been doing at your respective burial grounds?
Sure. We are at the museum specifically working on a year-long engagement and just trying to deepen our connection with the diaspora and descendant communities. So we've been holding a bunch of programs that and listening sessions to invite people in and listen to what they have to say, and incorporate those things into our programming and our running of the site. But mostly it's getting the word out there about the site right now as well. And of course, you know, we engaged people in the advisory group throughout this process. But not having the site open yet, you can't even actually go on the site because it's an active construction site, has been hard to really engage people directly on the site. So we're doing things at the farmhouse, such as libation ceremonies. We have a huge Pinkster celebration that we acted as allies for the Pinkster Stroll this year, that goes from Dyckman Farmhouse to New York Historical Society. And we're really thinking about how our museum can act as an ally for descendant communities, for the larger diaspora, to hold programs that are meaningful, impactful, and make everyone feel welcome and celebrated.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Very good.
And Ashley, have anything to add?
Thank you so much. We're doing some very similar things with Van Cortlandt Park Alliance. In phase 1 of this reimagining project, our work specifically with our Legacy Council, we've taken into account the representatives. They really are serving as almost like a streamline between us as an institution, also the larger institutions above us, like, you know, parks, and also our larger community. And as we think about our public programming, we also do a Pinkster Festival every single year. We'll be doing our Juneteenth Festival. We're also thinking ahead to the programming that we'll be doing specifically for this project, and bringing in those from the African diaspora community, but also thinking about the larger history. You spoke to this a bit, how it all interweaves. So we're also even thinking about those from the indigenous community and how that ends up connecting to the larger cultural programming that we're doing. And ultimately, we know that the real advocacy of all of this is the access point to it. So we want to be able to make it as accessible as possible to really everyone in the community. And the first way that we can do that is really by engaging with the descendant community specifically through the process of this project. So yeah, we're doing very similar things as well.
All right. Unfortunately, we are at time, but I just want to take a moment again to thank all of our panelists for sharing about their incredible work. Would also like to thank the Schomburg Center for hosting this event, for our community partners for allowing us to spread the word and share this event with everyone. As I mentioned before, we will do our best to answer the questions, and that will be posted on our website at edc.nyc/HABG. And also feel free to follow us on Instagram at Harlem African Burial Ground. And if you're curious about any of the other burial grounds that have been presented today, there's some information outside as you head out the door, and you can grab some flyers and information for more ways to get involved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job, y'all.
Yes.
Great. I feel like I've seen you multiple times.
Oh, you probably
too.
have.
I know. I love your lots too.
Thank you so much.
Great.